When I think of fascism, I don't think of governments. I think of social trends in broader communities, warning signs that you find, an indication that a community or a movement is leaning in a fascistic direction. Okay? Does that make sense? So think of it a little bit like a diagnosis of a mental illness, which is a very apt comparison. When you're diagnosing a mental illness, you can't just, for the most part, a doctor can't just like hear like two lines from their patient and check it off and go like, "Oh, yeah, that's that." It's usually more complicated. You have to dig into the thoughts and the patterns and the behaviors and the beliefs of the person you're talking to really understand the diagnosis. So when it comes to fascism, okay, here are some broader trends to look out for, okay? Think of it as political advocacy defined by some of these ideas. And I'm just going to list it off, okay? A worship of tradition and a rejection of modernism, i.e., we must return to the past. Modern society is degenerate, it is corrupting us. We need to return to the old ways. A promotion of action and advocacy over thought. Don't engage in introspection. Act. Fight. Fight for what is yours. But don't think about it. Thinking is emasculating. An obsession with right think and wrong think. If you disagree, this isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's treason. Disagreeing in a fascist society or with fascists means that you are an enemy to the people with whom you disagree. Think, by the way, of the language used in the fundraising emails the Trump campaign continues to send out. Hey, I notice you haven't donated in 90 days. If you don't donate soon, I'm going to be forced to tell our team that you've joined the no-good commie Democrats. I'm actually quoting. I'm pretty sure I'm like quoting word for word their fundraiser emails here. If you don't side with us, you're the enemy. That's a big one for fascism. A fear of difference is a key one as well, which appeals to the same thing. An appeal to social frustration. That's a big one too. You have to take this latent feeling that something is wrong. Often it's economic frustration. That happened here in America today among Trump voters. It happened in the Weimar Republic and the mega inflation they experienced after World War I. But it's also social frustration. One of the social frustrations that fascists in America appeal to the most is the fear that white straight men are having their rights removed. You see that a lot? Now people are being anti-white. Now people are being anti-men. Now people are being anti-straight. You all these things. These are the last groups you can attack these days, you know? Or the only groups that you can attack still. It's, you know, that sort of thing. A social frustration. Okay? We're almost done now. An obsession with a plot. There's always a story. Some enemy trying to destroy us. And that enemy is both strong and weak. Depending on the rhetorical framing, that enemy can be weak, cowardly, effeminate, easy to destroy, or overwhelming and unstoppable. Think of how conservatives talk about Antifa. What is Antifa? Is it a group of thin-necked 19-year-old soy boys who turn over trash cans? Or is it a group of militant agitators who travel from protest to protest as part of a nefarious plot to destroy America? Well, depending on when you ask them, they're going to say it's either or the other. To wrap it up, keep an eye out for anti-pacifism, the idea that you are a traitor if you do not wish to engage in violence. You saw this during the January 6th Capitol riots. Remember? Republican officials who were not publicly backing the attack on the Capitol were called traitors, and they called for their hanging. Everyone is educated to become a hero. This one is a little bit more esoteric, but think of it like this. Heroism is incredibly important to the fascist because the fascist is an authoritarian, usually highly deferential to the state. A hero in the fascist context is a person willing to die for that state, or for the race, or for the Volk, or for the people, or whatever. The hero is a person willing to give their life. Do you know how many 15, 16, 17-year-old German boys died on the front lines when the Nazis ran out of adult soldiers? Quite a few. And they were told, since they were old enough to understand, since they were old enough to hear German, that one day they might be called upon to die in service of the country, and that it was their responsibility, and that they would die a hero. The cult of heroism is a big, big component of fascism, as is an obsession with machismo and weaponry. I think that speaks to itself. Selective populism, that is to say, right populism. Yeah, we need to gang up on the elites. And by we, I mean the white, straight, cisgender working class who votes Republican. You know? We are anti-elite, except, I mean, a very small fragment of the population, proportional to the majority against the elites. And the last one is newspeak. And this is a big one. Remember the alternative facts meme? Fascism demands its advocates invent new terms whose job it is to obfuscate the meaning of the ideas being expressed. This is a fairly common one for authoritarian governments in general. It's played up in 1984, which is why newspeak is the term being used here by Umberto Eco. You take terms that are sinister and you recode them, smash them down, chop off ends of words and mix them together into some sort of Frankenstein until you have a completely new lexicon. Have you ever taken a look at a far right like pro-Trump board, like the Donald back before it got nuked? Oh my God, these people were barely speaking English. Okay, they were barely speaking English. They were looking through it. The jargon that they used was just, and there was a purpose to it as well. Is it because they're cowards or what? It's a part of cult-like behavior. If you get people who are part of an extremist crowd to speak a unique language, it becomes easier for them to speak with the in-crowd and harder for them to speak to people outside of that crowd. They begin to use terms and express ideas insular that are less and less understandable to the average person, until eventually their social circle is comprised almost exclusively of people who agree with them politically. Like this chat does. You could argue that Twitch memes and like Twitch emote speak is a kind of newspeak, but it's not a politically biased kind of newspeak. It's newspeak that is designed to accommodate a technological innovation more so than it is newspeak designed to truncate thought and create insular social political communities. Does that make sense? The reason why I spent so much time with this definition is because there's something that makes fascism unique. Most of the terms that we've described today were described by academics. They were constructed as a way of describing sets of ideas. Sometimes the words came about before the ideas were really even implemented. But in the case of fascism, I find it is most useful to think of it as a broad collection of social pathogens, types of behavior, sociological and psychological, that are destructive to human organized society, that emerge in certain conditions and tend to coexist. They develop and express themselves more effectively in tandem with one another, like a social pathogen, basically, a virus. So I know that sounds kind of larby, but I really do think that best explains the history of fascism. And if you look, by the way, at the history of fascism in this country and in others, then you'll find I think that's a fairly accurate example of how it emerges. It's not like neoliberalism. There is no neoliberal contagion that spreads from social movement to social movement with a bunch of vaguely interconnected ideas and rhetorical styles that merge together. No, neoliberalism is a fairly understandable economic and political framework that you can describe. Fascism is more complicated. So I use a broad definition. And if we're trying to determine whether or not something or someone is fascist, the best thing that you can do is look at their behavior, look at their language, and then try to find a way to see how well it matches onto these patterns. Almost every person and every political group is going to adhere to at least a few of these terms because they're so broad. That's why you can't just think of it as like a checklist. You have to think of it like a set of warning signs. Have you ever seen those those warning signs like if 10 or more of these apply to you, you may have depression, and one of them is like sleeps in late. If you sleep in late, that does not mean you have depression inherently. That's not like a one-to-one thing, you know? But it can contribute to a broader self-understanding, you know? Do you find yourself lolling in and out of coherence sometimes, like you're dissociating a little bit? That doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed, but it could mean it. And you have to look at these all together and think like, okay, how much does this describe me? How much does this describe us? That's how I like to think of fascism, in my opinion, personally.